Christ is the light of the world. For centuries, Christians have experienced the effect of sunlight moving through a church. Meanings have become associated with specific times of the day, sometimes from Scripture. This movement of the sun in a church and its associated meanings can be mapped on a church, develops axes in a church. This is an outline of St. Benedict's Abbey Church. The curve indicates that the sun rises to the right and sets to the left, and the midday sun is to the side of the church. The sunrise is associated with Christ who comes in the Incarnation at the end of time, and also today in the sacraments, body and blood of Christ brought, the book of the Gospels carried. On the left, the sun sets, the day ends, signaling the end of time, the dawn of eternity and eschatology. The maximum of the sun's intensity is at midday, a cosmic expression of the resurrection. The midday sun shining across the church establishes the evangelical axis for our church. I've given it that name because we're proclaiming the gospel, the good news, the evangelical axis of the church. Our Abbey Church is arranged very similarly to the new cathedral in St. Louis. The altar rail provides the dividing line between the Eucharistic liturgy at the altar and the liturgy of the Word celebrated at the ambo, located outside the altar rail, in the nave in the midst of the assembly. Let's see, I've already said all that. Here we don't have an altar rail, but we do have a step in the beginning. We have the upper and lower. The distinction is still there. Westminster Cathedral has a floor plan also very similar to our Abbey Church. Here, the ambo is located halfway down the nave in the midst of the assembly. More specifically, the ambo is placed, typically, it's under an arch, but here it's wrapped around the pier. The ambo from Westminster Cathedral does not harmonize well with our Abbey Church, but I have inserted that ambo here in a place analogous to its place in Westminster. I have placed it here at the base of a window to take advantage of the natural sunlight, the cosmic referent to the glory of the resurrection. Placed in front of the window, the monument of the empty tomb projects further into the nave and will be more visible from the choir, but still it's not fully visible. The deacon or concelebrant would stand in the monument of the empty tomb in the midst of the assembly, with the sun to his back and facing with the rays of the midday sun extending across the church. He would proclaim the gospel across the nave according to ancient tradition. This is the ambo of the shrine of Padre Pio in San Giovanni Rotondo. To the far right are two sculptured images laying Jesus' body in the tomb. As the narration moves toward the left, next you can see the angel telling the myrrh-bearing women, "He is not here. Go and tell the disciples." On the far left, the risen Lord appears and calls Mary by name. We could ask Kate Marin, who cast the bronze statues in our garden, if she would cast or sculpt figures out of stone to make an ambo for our church. I'm not trying to settle on any one architectural design or style. We have artisans. As a liturgist, I want to establish principles. I've inserted the sculpted figures into the nave of our church at the base of the window to serve as a monument of the empty tomb. The ambo should correspond to the altar in material, word, and Eucharist. They both could be made of the same stone. The presidential chair is properly in wood to harmonize with seating throughout the church. Our abbot is not a bishop. A bishop's chair might be of stone. The evangelical axis of our church is indicated by the vertical arrow in yellow. This axis begins with the midday sun at the bottom of the image and extends across the nave to illumine the darker regions beyond. The blue rectangle suggests a place for the monument of the empty tomb, located at the base of the last window before the side entrance into the church. The blue arrow indicates the direction the deacon faces to proclaim the gospel. The Reformed lectionary after Vatican II was structured in such a way that on most Sundays, the first reading looks to its fulfillment in the gospel. The green box indicates a lesser balcony where the lector would stand in the midst of the assembly to proclaim the other readings. The lector would look across the nave toward the monument of the empty tomb, toward the fulfillment of all Scripture in the gospel and in the resurrection of Christ. Here's the balcony for the epistle in the Basilica of Santa Maria in Cosmedin in Rome. I've inserted the epistle reading stand in the nave opposite the monument of the empty tomb. Of course, we'd need to design something fitting for our church. Notice how this arrangement preserves the direct processional way toward the altar. You walk down that center aisle straight to the altar, and on either side you have the Word. If the Liturgy of the Word, celebrated from the ambo in the nave, allows the lector to face toward the gospel and the deacon to proclaim the gospel as a response to the first reading. Such an ambo in the nave is reserved for the proclamation of Scripture, whereas preaching is better done from the chair. Ambos are for Scripture, proclamation of Scripture, and the monument of the empty tomb and all of the ritual narrates the resurrection accounts.